we right back on here on Street Hype Edutainment Show. We got a doctor here today. Would you like to give your name, sir?
Yes, I'm Bill Wiggins. I'm a historian. I taught for over 35 years. Live here in Hampton, Virginia, involved with the Contraband Historical Society in Project 1619. And we're focusing upon the arrival of those Africans almost 400 years ago at Point Comfort at Fort Monroe.
Now, you've been working on it with Mr. Calvin for about 15 years now as well?
No,
what?
I've worked with Calvin Pearson for about 4 or 5 years now at this point.
So you say you teach as well?
Yes, I've taught for about 35 years, and I've looked at the history of America. I've also looked at Russian history as well. I looked at social movements and have looked at the dynamics of American society and how different peoples were treated who were not of European descent. And as I said in my presentation, we still have a long ways to go because it looks like we still have a good part of the 21st century is in fact going to be the problem of the color line. We've come a long ways, but we need to do a lot to educate our senior citizens even now to try to change the way they interact with the younger generations. And we have to work with the younger generations as well.
I'll give you a definition of racism here before I move to Virginia. Let me preface what I'm going to say to give you an overview. Slavery by law arrived in places other than Virginia quite early. We know that in New England, slavery by law arrived in the 1630s. In Maryland, 1640s. So Virginia was kind of late in having slavery declared by law. I want you to keep that in mind. It's kind of like Jim Crow. A lot of people think that Jim Crow or segregation started where? In the South? No, it started in the North. That's part of the strange degree of Jim Crow. A couple of definitions of racism. This is from Webster's New World Dictionary. Racism, a doctrine or teaching without scientific support that claims to find racial differences in character, intelligence, etc., that asserts the superiority of one race over another or others, and that seeks to maintain the supposed purity of a race or the races. 3 individuals spent a lot of time, historians, studying the arrival of race or racism in the Virginia colonies. Oscar and Mary Hanlon, who are better known for immigration history. Carl Degler, who has written a number of different things, neither black nor white. And of course, Winthrop Jordan, mentioned by my colleague Michael Cobb, the author of White Over Black. They looked at the origins of race and racism. Now, the Hanlon said, when we consider Virginia, we consider 1619 and beyond, we know that the population here, let me go back a ways, actually, let me see if I have some of the statistics that I brought with me I want to share with you. We find that the African population did not grow very quickly at all in Virginia. Let me see if I have those statistics for you because they are very telling. We know that there were only about 25 Africans in America in 1625. So there was some falling off in terms of the population. But let me look further at some of the information here focusing upon Virginia. I paid close attention to the Black Laws of Virginia, which were edited by June Guild in 1936. She focused upon William Henning's statutes that focused upon laws that were enacted. We know that we did not have any convening of a General Assembly at all until 1619. And we don't have any record of exactly what was happening until about 1629, when William Henning started to record these things in the statute. So let me quote from June Guild. She says, in 1619 came the first 100 convicts banished to a life of servitude in the wild new country, which needed tobacco hands, and was shortly to need a few cotton pickers as well. There came also at this time the first contingent of maids seeking husbands, indentured based on contracting, apprenticing, spiriting, and voluntary servitude. Involuntary servitude were known in England at the time. Naturally, therefore, the indenture of servants and the institution of slavery became closely allied. Legally and socially in Virginia, many of the early laws were enacted for the better government of servants and slaves. So the use of the word slave came in very early, though they're trying to say slavery didn't exist, but they were being viewed, these Africans, as slaves, and the European indentured servants as what? As servants. Serving as indentured servants in Virginia were not only Negroes, and I think that's not accurate there, because they weren't viewed really as servants by most individuals. There were often boys, convicts, working men, and some who might truthfully be described as gentlemen. There is nothing to indicate that the position of the Negro, so Ms. Gill says, was conspicuously different and less comfortable than that of most of the others at first. So when did things start to change? Well, things started to change when reference was made to relations between white indentured servants and so-called African indentured servants. And one of the first things that we see showing up is that African indentured servants, and I'm using that term loosely, were told that they could not what? Associate in any way with European indentured servants. When a white European indentured servant and African indentured servant, quotes around that, were found to have been involved with one another, the European indentured servant was soundly whipped, and they were told that you're not to have any involvement, any relation at all with those African indentured servants. We also found that when it came to taxing individuals, it was determined that African so-called indentured servants were deemed to be tithable because they work in the fields. Now, the European women indentured servants, they would work in the house for the most part. But the African women were made to work out in the field. We also know clearly that there were laws that were enacted later on saying that Africans in America, in Virginia, were not allowed to carry any weapons. Now, you know that most individuals were, of course, carrying weapons, and to not have one left you somewhat defenseless. So there was a difference there as well. We see that there was definitely a difference of treatment of those African indentured servants really from the beginning, and there was already a concept that these Africans were inferior. You find it in the literature of the time, even before that, when Shakespeare was writing, you know, about Othello, the dirty, swarthy Moor, etc. So the concepts were already formed well before those Africans arrived.
I agree with you on that. I'm getting ready to come out with a book called From Kings to Gangsters. Okay. They're going to kind of touch some bases on that, about that cultural gap between the younger and the elder generation due to the way we speak, dress codes and stuff like that.
Yes, sir.
Personally, I feel that's a form of racism, even among our own people. If we looking at the way, just because I'm dressing or the way I may speak at the time. Can you like to address that?
I agree. That's a prejudice. You're judging someone, you're prejudging them, and you're not looking at what they have to offer. It's the old adage again, you don't judge a book by its cover. Every generation has its own view of things. I know that I was part of the Shikis, and I know there were individuals with the very high heel shoes that they had before, the Mac and the bell bottoms and the mini skirts. Yeah. So individuals just need to respect the generational differences. There has to be respect for one another. One doesn't want to disrespect their bodies, etc. But even when it comes to the music, we know there were quite a few songs out there even now that we would consider to be out there. Bootsy Collins and on. I can go forward with that. There are some that don't leave anything to the imagination. We need to be embracing and understanding as best we can. Now, if there's something that's just totally inappropriate, one should speak about that. But we all had our things that we did that the generation that birthed us didn't approve of. And we're still here. So I don't despair, because I feel that the things that we are taught that are appropriate will come back to make us successful progenitors for the future generations. All is not lost, but we need to work together and show each other support for our strengths and also point our weaknesses out.
Yeah, Dr. Wiggins, you know what I'm saying? Is there any way that people can get in touch with you or anything? You got a website or anything?
Yes,
Or what?
I can be reached at Cliosult. It's CLIOSULT at AOL.com. And my wife actually runs a retail store, Margot's Dolls Greek and Embroidery, and I can be found on various websites. And I'm a student who's still learning and sharing, and that's what it's about. Humility is very important, and we should all remember we are our brothers and sisters keepers.
That's right. I appreciate it, Mr. Williams.
Thank
Have
you.
a blessed day, all
You
right?
do the same.